A man dragged his wife's suitcase across the driveway and threw it into the street like it weighed nothing. Neighbors watched from their porches. No one stepped in. "Take her with you," Samuel Carter said, pointing at the coughing child clinging to Zoey's coat. "Both of you are done here." Zoey didn't argue. She didn't cry. She only bent down steady, gathering what little they had left. What no one there knew, what even Samuel didn't, was that the woman he had just erased from his life was already tied to a $28 billion empire waiting for her name. If you believe quiet strength always tells the truth in the end, stay with this story. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and your local time, and if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing. Zoey Bennett had long ago learned that silence could be mistaken for weakness. It was a mistake she allowed people to make. The apartment they lived in sat on the edge of a neighborhood that had once tried to be something better. Faded siding, cracked sidewalks, and lawns that were cut just often enough to avoid complaints. It wasn't unsafe. Wasn't comfortable either. It was simply where people stayed when leaving required more certainty than they had. Zoey moved through that space quietly, like someone who understood the value of not drawing attention. She woke before sunrise, always before Samuel, and prepared Lily's medication before anything else. The small plastic organizer sat on the kitchen counter, divided by day and hour, each compartment. A reminder that time for them was not abstract. It was measured in doses. Lily Carter was 8 years old, small for her age, with a persistent cough that never fully left her. Some days, it softened into the background. Other days, it took over her entire body, leaving her breathless and trembling. Zoey had learned to read those shifts the way others read weather patterns, subtle changes in tone and posture, in the way Lily held her chest. "Slow breaths," Zoey would say, gently kneeling in front of her. Just like we practiced, Lily trusted her completely. That trust was something Zoey never spoke about, never displayed. But she protected it with a precision that bordered on discipline. Samuel Carter, on the other hand, had grown increasingly impatient with anything he couldn't control. He worked in regional sales for a mid-sized logistics company, one of those roles that required constant performance without ever quite offering security. His income fluctuated. His status in his own mind depended entirely on how others perceived him. That meant appearances mattered more than truth. He ironed his shirts carefully. He checked his reflection before leaving. He spoke on the phone louder than necessary when clients were involved. And lately, he had started to look at his own life the same way, like something that needed to appear more successful than it actually was. Which was why Lily's medical bills felt to him like an exposure. "They're not even trying to make it affordable," Samuel muttered one evening, flipping through a stack of envelopes. "Every month, it's something new." Zoey stood at the sink rinsing dishes. She didn't turn around. "We can set up another payment plan," she said quietly. "We already have 3. There was a pause. Oh, not long, but enough. Samuel exhaled sharply and dropped the papers onto the table. "I'm the only one bringing in real money, Zoey. Do you understand that?" Zoey dried her hand slowly before turning to face him. "I do." It wasn't defiance. It wasn't agreement either. It was acknowledgement. Samuel didn't like that kind of response. It gave him nothing to push against. "You work, 20 hours a week at that place," he continued. "That doesn't cover anything meaningful. The hours are flexible," Zoey replied. "So I can take Lily to appointments." "I know why you do it," he said, his voice tightening. "That doesn't change the fact that it's not enough." Zoey nodded once. Behind her calm expression, she was already cataloging the conversation. Date, time, context. Not because she planned to use it, not yet, but because she had learned that memory, when left unrecorded, could be rewritten by someone louder. That night after Samuel went to bed, Zoey sat at the small kitchen table with a notebook she kept hidden behind a stack of old cookbooks. The cover was plain. Inside it was precise. She wrote, March 14th. Samuel mentioned finances again. Tone escalated. Statement. "I'm the only one bringing in real money." She paused, then added, "Lily present." quiet. The pen moved steadily. No emotion, just fact. Across the apartment, Lily coughed in her sleep. Zoey closed the notebook immediately and stood. By the time she reached Lily's room, she was already shifting back into the role that mattered most. She adjusted the girl's blanket, checked her temperature, and listened not just to the cough, but to the rhythm beneath it. Still stable. Zoey stayed there longer than necessary, sitting at the edge of the bed, her hand resting lightly on Lily's arm. She didn't think about Samuel in that moment. She didn't think about bills or arguments, or the slow erosion of something that had once resembled a partnership. She thought about timing. Medication at 2 a.m. Next appointment on Tuesday, refill needed by Friday. Everything in her life had narrowed into sequences like that. Manageable. Contained. Predictable if she was careful. It was how she survived. What Samuel never noticed, or perhaps never cared to notice, was how much of that structure depended on Zoey alone. He saw the results: a child still functioning, a household still running, meals still appearing on the table. He did not see the system behind it, and because he didn't see it, he didn't value it. A week later, the pressure shifted again. Samuel came home earlier than usual, his expression already set in irritation. "They passed me over," he said, tossing his keys onto the counter. Zoey looked up from where she was helping Lily with homework. "For what?" "The promotion," he snapped. "Who do you think?" Lily froze slightly at the tone. Zoey noticed. "I'm sorry," Zoey said, her voice steady. "What happened? What happened?" Samuel laughed, but there was no humor in it. They gave it to someone who can actually commit to the job. Someone who doesn't have to run home every time something goes wrong. Zoey held his gaze. "You mean someone without a child who's sick?" "I mean someone whose life isn't this," he said, gesturing vaguely around the room. The word lingered longer than anything else he'd said. This. Not Lily, not Zoey, not the apartment. Just a dismissal broad enough to include everything. Zoey didn't respond immediately. She reached out and closed Lily's workbook. "Why don't you finish this later?" she said gently. "Go rest for a bit." Lily nodded and slipped off the chair, moving quietly toward her room. They both waited until the door closed. Only then did Zoey speak. "We'll adjust," she said. "We always do." Samuel shook his head. "No, you adjust. I just deal with the consequences." Zoey absorbed that without visible reaction. But something deep beneath the practiced calm registered the shift. This wasn't frustration anymore. It was positioning. He was beginning to separate himself from them. Not physically, not yet, but in language. And language, Zoey knew, often came before action. That night, her notebook entry was longer. She documented the exact phrasing, the tone, the context of the promotion. The implication that Lily's condition was an obstacle, something external to Samuel, something imposed on him. She didn't label it. She didn't need to. Patterns didn't require names to be real. Over the next few days, Samuel grew quieter in a different way. Less complaining, more distance. He took calls in the other room. He stayed out later. When he was home, he avoided direct conversation unless necessary. To anyone else, it might have looked like relief, the absence of conflict. To Zoey, it felt like preparation. She didn't confront him. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she paid closer attention. Bank notifications stopped appearing. A card declined once at the pharmacy before going through on a second attempt. Samuel began keeping his phone face down. None of it was dramatic. All of it was deliberate. Zoey wrote everything down. Not because she feared what was coming, but because she already understood that whatever it was, it would not be sudden. It would be built, piece by piece, word by word, choice by choice. And when it finally arrived, it would look to Samuel completely justified. Zoey closed her notebook that night with the same quiet precision she used for everything else. In the next room, Lily slept, her breathing uneven but steady. In another part of the apartment, Samuel scrolled through something on his phone, his face lit by a soft blue glow. 3 people under one roof. 3 different understandings of the same life. Only one of them was paying attention to all of it. And only one of them was already preparing for what came next. The fracture did not arrive loudly. It revealed itself the way most truths do, through a moment that could still be dismissed as nothing if someone needed it to be. The invitation came in a group message Samuel almost ignored. A colleague from work, Jason Miller, was hosting a small backyard gathering. Nothing formal, just drinks, grilled food, and a chance to connect outside the office. The kind of thing Samuel usually considered necessary rather than enjoyable. Spouses welcome, the message ended. Samuel read it twice. Zoey noticed the change in his posture before he said anything. He leaned back slightly, one hand rubbing his chin, calculating. "We're going," he said finally. Zoey looked up from Lily's medication chart. "On Saturday, 4 o'clock. Zoey nodded once. "Okay." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask if it was important. But she understood. Samuel didn't want to go alone. He wanted to be seen. Saturday arrived warmer than expected. The kind of early spring afternoon that encouraged people to pretend winter had fully ended. Zoey dressed simply. A soft gray sweater, clean but worn at the cuffs. Dark jeans. Nothing that drew attention. Nothing that invited judgment. Lily wore a light jacket, her small hand resting in Zoey's as they walked toward Jason Miller's house. Samuel walked ahead of them. Not far enough to be obvious, but far enough. The backyard was already filled with people when they arrived. Conversations overlapped. Laughter rose and fell in uneven waves. Music played softly somewhere near the house. Jason greeted Samuel with a firm handshake. "Glad you made it," he said. His eyes flicked briefly toward Zoey and Lily, polite but quick. Samuel smiled wider than usual. Wouldn't miss it. Zoey observed everything without appearing to. Who held the center of conversations? Who laughed too loudly? Who listened more than they spoke? Patterns revealed themselves quickly when you weren't trying to be seen. They stayed near the edge of the yard at first. Zoey found a chair for Lily, positioning it where she could sit comfortably without being in the direct path of movement. She checked Lily's breathing still steady and placed the inhaler within easy reach. "You okay?" Zoey asked softly. Lily nodded. "Just tired." Zoey brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "Tell me if it gets worse." Across the yard, Samuel was already shifting into a different version of himself. His voice carried more. His gestures were sharper. He laughed at things that weren't particularly funny. Zoey had seen this before. This was the version of Samuel that belonged to other people. For a while, nothing happened. Conversations remained surface level. Work, weather, small complaints that carried no real weight. Then someone asked the wrong question. It came from a woman Zoey hadn't met before, Angela Brooks, another colleague. So Zoey Angela said, smiling politely, "What do you do?" It was a simple question. Samuel answered before Zoey could. "She works part-time," he said. "Flexible schedule?" Angela nodded, waiting for more. Zoey spoke then. "I help manage records at a community library." "Ah," Angela said. "That must be nice." Quiet. "It is," Zoey replied. There was no embarrassment in her voice, no defensiveness, just fact. Samuel took a sip of his drink. "It's convenient," he added, "given everything." The word hung there. Everything. Angela's smile tightened, slightly uncertain. Zoey felt Lily shift beside her. The girl's fingers curled slightly into Zoey's sleeve. Zoey placed her hand gently over Lily's. "Steady." Angela glanced toward Lily. "And how old is she?" she asked. 8, Zoey said. "She's been dealing with some health issues." Samuel interjected, his tone light, but carrying further than necessary. "It's been a lot." A few nearby conversations quieted, not intentionally, but enough to create space. Zoey noticed. Samuel continued. "Doctor visits, medications, you name it. It adds up." Angela nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. That must be hard." "It is," Samuel said, "especially when you're trying to keep everything else afloat." Zoey said nothing. She didn't need to. Samuel was building something, piece by piece. And once he started, he rarely stopped on his own. He went on gesturing loosely. I'm basically carrying the whole financial side of things. And with my job, it's not like I can just step back. There was a slight shift in the group now. Not sympathy, something closer to discomfort. Angela glanced at Zoey again, then back at Samuel. That sounds like a lot of pressure, she said carefully. Samuel laughed. Pressure's one way to put it. Zoey could feel Lily's breathing change. Subtle, faster. She reached for the inhaler, placing it quietly in Lily's hand. Slow, she whispered, just like we practiced. Lily nodded, focusing. Samuel didn't notice, or chose not to. Sometimes I think he said, lowering his voice just enough to suggest honesty things would be easier if I didn't have to manage everything alone. The word alone landed harder than the rest, because it wasn't true. And everyone there, whether they acknowledged it or not, understood that. Zoey looked at him then, not with anger, not with hurt, but with clarity. This was no longer about stress. This was narrative. He was rewriting their life in real time, and he was doing it in front of witnesses. Angela shifted uncomfortably. I'm sure Zoey does a lot, she said. Samuel shrugged. She tries. It was quiet, almost casual, but it cut deeper than anything louder could have. Zoey felt Lily's hand tighten around hers. Mom, Lily whispered. I know, Zoey said softly. She stood then, slowly helping Lily to her feet. I think we should go, Zoey said. Samuel frowned. What already Lily needs rest. She's fine, Samuel said quickly. We just got here. Zoey didn't argue. She needs rest, she repeated. There was a pause. Samuel looked around briefly, aware of the eyes on him now. And something in that awareness pushed him further. If she's always going to be like this, he said, his voice sharper, then what's the point of even bringing her? The words landed. Fully. No one spoke, no one moved. Zoey felt something shift inside her, not breaking, not collapsing, aligning. She knelt slightly in front of Lily. Let's get your jacket, she said. Lily nodded, her eyes lowered. Zoey helped her carefully, her movements unhurried. Behind them, Samuel exhaled loudly. I'm serious, Zoey, he said. This he gestured toward Lily, toward the situation, toward everything. This isn't sustainable. Zoey stood. She looked at him once more. Still calm, still steady. But something had changed. Not in expression, in understanding. I know, she said. It wasn't agreement. It was recognition. Of him, of what he had become, and of what would come next. Samuel seemed almost surprised by the lack of resistance. He expected something, an argument, a reaction, something he could push against. Zoey gave him none of it. She took Lily's hand and began walking toward the gate. No rush, no hesitation. Behind them, conversation slowly resumed, but quieter now altered. Because everyone there had seen it. Not just the words, but the absence of care behind them. And though no one said it aloud, the truth settled into the space they left behind. This had not been a bad moment. It had been a clear one. Zoey did not look back as they stepped onto the sidewalk. She didn't need to. Everything she needed to understand had already been said. And this time, she would not leave it unrecorded. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Zoey opened her notebook again. Her handwriting remained steady. March 21st. Public gathering Jason Miller's. Statements made by Samuel in front of multiple witnesses. Key phrases, I'm basically carrying everything. She tries. If she's always going to be like this. She paused, then added one more line. Shift confirmed. Zoey closed the notebook. In the quiet of the apartment, the weight of that single line settled more heavily than anything Samuel had said. Because it wasn't just a record. It was a marker. The point at which something invisible became undeniable. And once something became undeniable, it could no longer be ignored. Not by Zoey, and eventually, not by anyone else. The night Samuel Carter chose to end his family did not begin with raised voices. It began with absence. Zoey noticed it first in the smallest places, the kitchen drawer where the bank statements were usually kept, now empty. The shared debit card that declined at the pharmacy that afternoon, forcing her to use the last of her emergency cash. The way Samuel didn't come home at his usual time and didn't answer when she called. By the time the clock passed 9, Zoey had already adjusted. Lily had taken her medication. Dinner, simple quiet, was finished. The dishes were drying on a towel beside the sink. The apartment held that strange stillness that came not from peace, but from waiting. Zoey did not pace. She sat at the table, her notebook open, but untouched, listening. When the door finally opened, it wasn't abrupt. Samuel stepped inside with deliberate calm, closing it behind him with a quiet click. He did not greet them. He walked past the kitchen into the bedroom and shut the door. Zoey remained seated. Lily looked up from the couch. "Is Dad home?" "Yes," Zoey said. Lily hesitated. "Is he mad?" Zoey considered the question. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. What Zoey did know was this: Samuel had already made a decision. She could feel it in the way he moved, contained, resolved, detached. 20 minutes later, he came back out. He was holding something, a small stack of papers. Zoey stood. Samuel placed the papers on the table between them. "You should read these," he said. Zoey glanced down. Bank notices, account closures, authorization changes. Her name was missing from every line. She did not reach for them. Instead, she looked at Samuel. "When did you do this today?" His tone was even. "Prepared. You removed me from the accounts." "Yes." For what reason? Samuel exhaled slowly, as if the explanation were obvious. "Because I'm done carrying this alone." Zoey absorbed the words without visible reaction. Lily had gone very still on the couch. Zoey shifted slightly, positioning herself so Lily could not fully see her face. "This isn't something you do without discussion," Zoey said quietly. "I just did." The simplicity of it removed any illusion of negotiation. Zoey nodded once. "Then what happens next?" Samuel's gaze held steady. "You take Lily and figure something out." There was no hesitation, no softening. The words landed exactly as he intended them to. Zoey did not move. Lily's voice came small and uncertain. Dad Samuel didn't look at her. "I can't keep doing this," he continued, addressing Zoey as if Lily weren't in the room. "The bills, the constant appointments, the everything. It's not sustainable." Zoey stepped closer to the table. "It's your daughter," she said. Samuel's jaw tightened. "That doesn't change the reality." Zoey let the silence stretch just long enough to make the statement settle. "You're asking us to leave," she said. "I'm telling you." There it was. Clear, final. Zoey's mind did not rush. It organized. Immediate priorities. Lily's medication, medical records, clothing, identification. Everything else was secondary. "How long do we have?" Zoey asked. Samuel checked his watch almost absently. "Tonight." Lily's breath caught. Zoey heard it, felt it. But her expression did not change. "Understood," she said. Samuel seemed almost unsettled by the lack of resistance. "You're not even going to argue?" he asked. Zoey looked at him. "No." That answer carried more weight than any confrontation could have. Samuel looked away first. Zoey turned and walked toward the bedroom. She did not rush. Every movement was deliberate. She pulled out a small suitcase, the one she used for Lily's hospital stays. It was already half prepared by habit. She began packing. Medication first, inhalers, prescriptions, backup doses, then documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, medical history. She placed them in a separate folder, sliding it carefully into the front compartment. Clothes came last. Only what was necessary. In the living room, Samuel poured himself a drink. Ice clinked against glass. The sound carried clearly. Lily remained on the couch, watching him. "Are we going on a trip?" she asked. Samuel took a sip before answering. "No." "Then why is Mom packing?" He didn't respond. Lily's voice trembled slightly. "Am I coming back?" Samuel exhaled, setting the glass down harder than needed. I don't know, Lily. Zoey paused in the doorway. Not long, just enough to hear, just enough to remember. She stepped fully into the living room. Lily, Zoey said gently, come here. Lily slid off the couch and walked to her. Zoey knelt in front of her. We're going somewhere else for a while, she said. You'll have everything you need. Will Dad come? Zoey held her gaze. No. Lily nodded slowly. Children understood more than they were often given credit for. Zoey stood and took her hand. Get your jacket. They moved together. Quiet, coordinated. Samuel watched from the kitchen, his expression unreadable. When Zoey returned with the suitcase, she stopped near the door. Keys, she said. Samuel frowned. What? The spare set. For the car. Samuel shook his head. You're not taking the car. Zoey didn't argue. Then we'll need a ride. That's your problem. Zoey held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Understood. She reached for her phone. One call, that was all it took. Mrs. Harper, Zoey said softly when the line connected. I'm sorry to call this late. I was wondering if you might be able to help us with a ride. There was a pause. Then, of course, dear. Give me 5 minutes. Zoey ended the call. Samuel laughed quietly. So, that's the plan. It's the immediate solution, Zoey replied. He shook his head. You always think you can just manage your way through things. Zoey did not respond. Because she could. And she would. 5 minutes later, headlights appeared through the window. Zoey lifted the suitcase. Lily held her hand tightly. At the door, Zoey paused. Not for long. Just enough to turn back. Samuel, she said. He looked at her. For the first time that night, there was something uncertain in his expression. Not regret, not yet, but the absence of complete control. Zoey spoke calmly. Everything that happened tonight matters. Samuel frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Zoey didn't explain. She didn't need to. You'll understand later, she said. Then she opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Mrs. Harper stood by her car, concern already visible in her posture. Oh, honey, she said softly, as Zoey and Lily stepped outside. Zoey gave a small nod. Thank you. They walked to the car together. Behind them, the door remained open for a moment longer than necessary. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching. Not calling them back, not stopping them, just watching. As if what he had done still hadn't fully settled into reality. Zoey helped Lily into the back seat, securing her gently. She placed the suitcase in the trunk. Then she turned once more toward the house. The place that had held their life. Not perfect, not safe, but theirs. For a moment the scene was still. Then Zoey got into the car. The door closed. Mrs. Harper pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller. Samuel remained where he was, a figure in a doorway, watching something leave that he'd already decided he didn't need. Inside the car, Lily leaned against Zoey. Where are we going? She whispered. Zoey wrapped an arm around her. Somewhere we can rest, she said. Wasn't a promise of more, just enough. And for now, enough was all they needed. But what Samuel Carter did not understand as the car disappeared into the night was that this moment, this precise, controlled, deliberate decision, had already begun to move beyond his control. Because Zoey had not left empty-handed. She had taken everything that mattered. And she had left with something far more dangerous than anger. She had left with record. The motel room smelled faintly of detergent, and something older beneath it like time that had settled into the walls and never quite left. Zoey noticed it the moment she stepped inside. Not because it mattered, but because she noticed everything. Mrs. Harper stood just behind her, arms folded lightly as if holding herself back from saying too much. It's not much, she said gently, but it's clean, and the manager owes me a favor. Zoey set the suitcase down near the bed. It's more than enough, she replied. And she meant it, because enough was not a standard measured by comfort. It was measured by safety. Lily sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slightly hunched, her breathing uneven from the cold air outside. Zoey crossed the room, immediately kneeling in front of her, one hand already reaching for the inhaler. Slow, Zoey said softly. In and out. Lily followed her rhythm, one breath at a time. Zoey stayed there until the tension eased from the girl's chest, until her shoulders relaxed just enough to signal stability. Only then did she stand. Mrs. Harper watched quietly. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "We'll figure things out." Zoey nodded. "Thank you." There were no extra words, no explanations offered, no details given. Mrs. Harper didn't ask. Some people understood boundaries without needing them spoken. After she left, the room grew still. Zoey moved with quiet efficiency. Medication placed within reach. Documents secured in the nightstand drawer. Shoes positioned near the door. Every item had a place. Every placement had a reason. Lily lay down slowly, exhaustion overtaking the adrenaline of the night. "Mom," she murmured. "Yes." "Did we do something wrong?" Zoey sat beside her. "No," she said. Lily turned slightly, her eyes searching. "Then why did Dad?" Zoey placed a hand gently over hers. "Some decisions belong to the person who makes them," she said, "not to the people they affect." Lily didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. That was enough. Within minutes, she was asleep. Zoey remained where she was for a while longer, listening. Not just to Lily's breathing, but to the silence around it. No footsteps in the next room. No raised voices. No tension pressing against the walls. It was the first time in a long while that silence felt neutral. Not peaceful, but not dangerous either. Zoey stood slowly and walked to the small table by the window. Her notebook came out first, then her phone. She opened a new entry. March 21st, removed from residence. Witness Mrs. Harper. Financial access revoked earlier same day. Child present during removal. Statements recorded. She paused, then added, "No resistance offered." The pen hovered for a moment longer, then conditions controlled. Zoey closed the notebook. Across from her, her phone screen lit up briefly. An unknown number. She let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then answered. "Zoey Bennett," a woman's voice asked. "Yes, my name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm an attorney with Lawson and Keene in New York. I've been trying to reach you." Zoey's expression did not change. "How did you get this number? It was listed under your previous employment records," Rebecca replied. "I understand this may seem unexpected, but this matter is time-sensitive." Zoey remained silent. Not dismissing, not accepting, listening. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Charles Whitmore," Rebecca continued. The name settled into the space between them. Zoey did not react immediately, but something quiet, distant shifted. "You have the wrong person," Zoey said. "I don't believe we do," Rebecca replied calmly. "Zoey Whitmore. Date of birth matches. Social records confirm. We've spent the last several weeks verifying identity before making contact." Zoey's grip on the phone tightened slightly. That name. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. "Why are you contacting me?" she asked. "There has been a death," Rebecca said. "And based on the terms of the estate, you are listed as the primary beneficiary." Zoey turned slightly, her gaze moving toward the bed where Lily slept. "I think you've made a mistake," she said quietly. "We anticipated that response," Rebecca replied, "which is why we prepared documentation. I can send everything to you electronically or arrange a secure in-person meeting, whichever you prefer." Zoey said nothing. Rebecca continued. "The estate in question is significant, Miss Bennett, or should I say, Miss Whitmore." Zoey closed her eyes briefly. Not in distress, in calculation. "Define significant," she said. There was a pause on the other end. Then, carefully, "The Whitmore holdings include controlling interests in multiple corporations, private equity assets, and international accounts. The total valuation currently stands at approximately $28 billion. The number entered the room without sound, without weight, and yet it changed the structure of everything around it. Zoey did not respond. Rebecca's voice softened slightly. "I understand this is a lot to process, but we do need to confirm your identity and proceed with a legal transfer. There are also conditions attached to the inheritance. that require your acknowledgement. Zoey opened her eyes. Her gaze was steady again. When do you need an answer? She asked. As soon as possible, Rebecca said. Ideally within 48 hours. Zoey nodded, though the gesture could not be seen. Send the documents, she said. I will. Secure email. You'll receive a link within the hour. The call ended. The room returned to silence, but it was no longer the same silence. Zoey remained standing by the window, the phone still in her hand. $28 billion. The number did not excite her. It did not overwhelm her. It did not comfort her. It simply existed. Like a fact. Like a piece of information that would need to be understood, verified, and if real, managed. Zoey set the phone down carefully. Her attention shifted immediately and instinctively back to Lily. Breathing steady, color normal, no immediate distress, good. Zoey moved to the nightstand and checked the medication schedule again. Unchanged, reliable, unlike everything else. Her phone buzzed. Email received. Zoey did not open it right away. Instead, she sat down, hands folded lightly in her lap, thinking, not about the money, not about the estate, but about timing. Earlier that same day, financial access revoked, removal from home, now contact from a law firm, inheritance. It would be easy, too easy, to connect the events emotionally, to interpret them as reversal, as balance. Zoey did not think that way. Correlation was not causation, and emotion was not evidence. She reached for the phone again, opened the email, secure link, verification steps, documents, names, signatures, corporate structures, trust frameworks, everything laid out in the precise, unemotional language of law. Zoey read slowly, carefully, not skipping, not assuming, each detail processed, stored, cross-referenced with what little she remembered from a life she had deliberately left behind. Whitmore. She had not spoken that name in over a decade, not because she had forgotten, but because she had chosen to. That choice had not been impulsive. It had been final, or so she had believed. Zoey closed the email, not finished, but paused. Across the room, Lily shifted in her sleep, a soft cough escaping her. Zoey stood immediately and moved to her side, hand on her back, counting breaths, 1, 2, 3, stable. Zoey remained there, her presence steady, her mind already moving through the layers of what had just entered her life. Samuel Carter believed he had ended something that night. A burden, a responsibility, a chapter he no longer wished to carry. What he did not know, what he could not yet understand, was that while he had been closing doors, something else, something far larger, had just opened. And Zoey Bennett, or Zoey Whitmore, had not yet decided which name she would use to walk through it. Morning arrived without ceremony. Light filtered through thin motel curtains, pale and indifferent, as if the night before had been no more than a minor interruption. Zoey was already awake when the first sounds of distant traffic reached the room. She had slept in intervals 20 minutes at a time, never fully letting go. Lily was still asleep. Zoey watched her for a moment before moving, breathing even, color stable, no immediate distress, so Zoey stood and began the day the same way she always did, by creating order. Medication schedule checked, water refreshed, temperature noted. Only after those things were done did she return to the email. She opened it again this time with a different intention, not curiosity, verification. The documents were extensive, structured, layered. Nothing about them suggested urgency for its own sake. Every clause, every signature, every reference aligned with a system that had existed long before Zoey ever stepped into it, or stepped away from it. She scrolled slowly. Whitmore Holdings. The name appeared repeatedly. Corporate filings, board structures, trust allocations. A diagram outlined ownership percentages across multiple subsidiaries, energy infrastructure, healthcare, logistics. It was not a single company. It was an ecosystem. Zoey paused at a section labeled Primary Beneficiary Transition Protocol. Her name, both names appeared there. Zoey Whitmore, formerly registered as Zoey Bennett. There was no ambiguity, only confirmation. Her phone vibrated. Another call, the same number. Zoey answered. "Yes, Miss Whitmore," Rebecca Lawson said. "Thank you for reviewing the materials." "I haven't finished," Zoey replied. "That's expected," Rebecca said. "I'm calling to walk you through the next steps, not to rush you." Zoey leaned slightly against the table. "Proceed." Rebecca's tone remained measured. "First, we'll need to confirm your identity in person. We can arrange for a secure meeting location, New York, Chicago, or wherever is most convenient." Zoey glanced toward Lily. "Not today," she said. "Of course. We can accommodate your schedule," Rebecca continued. "Second, the estate is currently under interim management. Control will transfer to you once verification is complete and you accept the terms of succession." "What are the terms?" Zoey asked. "Acknowledgement of fiduciary responsibility," Rebecca said. "An agreement to assume oversight of existing structures. You won't be expected to manage daily operations immediately, but your authority will be recognized." Zoey absorbed that. Authority, not access, not allowance. Control. "And if I decline?" Zoey asked. There was a slight pause. "The assets would transfer to secondary beneficiaries," Rebecca said. "However, based on the current structure, that would significantly alter the governance of the entire organization." Zoey nodded faintly. "So the system is built around me?" "Yes, not by chance, by design." Zoey closed her eyes briefly, not in overwhelm, but in recalibration. "I'll need time," she said. "You have it," Rebecca replied. "But I would strongly advise we move forward with identity verification soon. There are also legal considerations that may affect your current situation." Zoey's gaze sharpened. "Clarify." Rebecca did not hesitate. "If you are currently experiencing any form of financial or custodial dispute," she said, "your status as primary beneficiary could influence those proceedings, but only after verification." Zoey understood immediately. Not advantage, leverage, properly applied. "Understood," she said. "We'll prepare everything," Rebecca replied, and Miss Whitmore Zoey did not correct her. "Yes, you're not stepping into something new," Rebecca said. "You're stepping back into something that was always yours." The call ended. Zoey remained still for a moment. Then she moved. Not toward the window, not toward the door, toward Lily. Because nothing else came first, Lily stirred slightly as Zoey adjusted the blanket. "Morning," Zoey said softly. Lily blinked, still half asleep. "Are we still here?" "Yes." Lily nodded. "Okay. No panic, no confusion. Children adapted faster than adults, especially when they trusted the person guiding them." Zoey helped her sit up. "Medication first," she said. "Routine? Always routine." While Lily swallowed her pills, Zoey's mind continued to organize. Legal identity verification, asset transfer, custody implications, financial reconstruction. Each element separated, categorized, prioritized. There was no rush, because rushing created mistakes. And mistakes in systems like this had consequences. After breakfast, simple, minimal, Zoey made another call. "Rebecca," she said when the line connected. "Schedule the meeting." "Location?" Rebecca asked. "Closest major city with full legal support," Zoey replied. "And medical facilities." Rebecca didn't ask why. "Chicago," she said. "We have a secure office there." "Then Chicago. I'll arrange transportation." "No," Zoey said. "I'll handle that." A brief pause. "Understood." The call ended. Zoey turned to Lily. "We're going to travel for a day," she said. "There will be doctors there too." Lily looked at her carefully. "Is this about yesterday?" Zoey considered the question. "Yes," she said. Lily nodded slowly. "Okay, no fear, just acceptance." Zoey began preparing again. Documents packed. Medication doubled. Emergency contacts updated. Every step deliberate. Every step necessary. Across the country, in a house that still held their absence, Samuel Carter sat at the same kitchen table. The papers he had placed there the night before remained untouched. He expected something. A call, a message, resistance. There had been none. At first, that had felt like control. Now it felt like something else. He checked his phone again. Nothing. He opened his banking app. Everything in order. Accounts secured. Access exclusive. Exactly as he intended. And yet, something unsettled him. Not guilt, not regret. Something closer to imbalance. As if a decision he had made cleanly had not ended cleanly. He dismissed it, because from his perspective, the situation was simple. He had removed a burden, reduced financial strain, reclaimed control. Zoey would struggle. She would eventually reach out. And when she did, he would decide what to do next. That was how things worked. That was how they had always worked. What Samuel did not know, what he could not yet see, was that Zoey Bennett had already stepped into a different framework entirely. One where control was not asserted through volume, but through structure, through documentation, through law, and somewhere between a motel room and a law office in Chicago. The foundation of that structure was already being built. Not loudly, not visibly, but precisely. Because Zoey did not react to events, she prepared for outcomes. And Samuel Carter, still sitting at his table, still believing he had ended something, had no understanding that he had just placed himself inside a system that would not be moved by his voice, his anger, or his assumptions, only by evidence, only by record, only by truth. And Zoey had all three. Zoey did not announce anything. Not to Samuel, not to anyone who had known her as Zoey Bennett. Power, she understood, was most stable when it moved without noise. The trip to Chicago was arranged with the same quiet precision that defined everything else she did. A car service, not extravagant but reliable, picked them up before sunrise. Lily sat beside her in the back seat, bundled in a blanket, her breathing steady under careful monitoring. Zoey watched the road ahead, not because she was interested in the scenery, but because forward motion required attention. Arrival did not change that. The building that housed Lawson and Keene's Chicago office did not advertise itself. It didn't need to. The lobby was understated, controlled, and designed to remove distraction. Rebecca Lawson met them in person. She was exactly as her voice suggested, composed, efficient, and uninterested in unnecessary formality. "Miss Whitmore," she said, extending her hand. Zoey shook it. "Zoey Bennett," she replied. Rebecca nodded once. "Of course." No correction, no insistence, just acknowledgement. Michael Grant joined them shortly after, a financial advisor whose presence was defined more by observation than speech. They moved into a private conference room. No glass walls, no external view. Everything contained. Rebecca placed a folder in front of Zoey. "These are the original documents," she said. "You've reviewed the digital copies. Today is for verification and clarification." Zoey opened the folder. The paper was heavier than standard stock. Official, deliberate. She read slowly, not because she didn't understand, because she refused to assume. Each clause confirmed what she had already begun to accept. Ownership structures, voting rights, asset distributions, everything aligned with the number Rebecca had stated. $28 billion. But the number remained secondary. Zoey's focus stayed on control. "How much authority transfers immediately upon verification?" she asked. Michael answered. "Majority voting rights across the primary holding entities," he said. "You would also have the ability to appoint or remove board members." Zoey nodded. "And operational oversight delegated," Michael said, "but ultimately accountable to you." Zoey leaned back slightly. Responsibility, not privilege. She understood the difference. Rebecca slid another document forward. "There are also legal considerations regarding your current circumstances," she said. Zoey looked up. "Explain?" Rebecca's tone remained even. "If you are currently involved in a domestic dispute involving financial control or custodial rights, your verified status as primary beneficiary changes your legal position significantly." Zoey did not interrupt. "It establishes independent financial capacity," Rebecca continued, "which affects arguments related to stability, dependency, and caregiving capability." Zoey's gaze sharpened slightly. And if the opposing party has already initiated action, then we respond, Rebecca said, with documentation. Zoey closed the folder, not because she was finished, because she had enough. Proceed with verification, she said. Rebecca nodded. The process was methodical. Identification, biometric confirmation, signature validation, each step recorded, each step witnessed. There was no ceremony, no moment of recognition, just completion. When it was done, Rebecca spoke first. It's official, she said. Zoey Whitmore is now the recognized primary beneficiary of the Whitmore estate. Zoey did not react, not outwardly, because the title did not change what she needed to do next. Then we begin, she said. Michael exchanged a brief glance with Rebecca. Begin what he asked. Zoey met his gaze. Documentation alignment, she said, and legal response preparation. Rebecca allowed a faint, almost imperceptible shift in expression. Approval. You already have something in mind, she said. Zoey nodded. Everything she replied. Back in the motel room that evening, Zoey resumed her routine without deviation. Lily's medication, dinner, rest. Only after Lily was asleep did Zoey open a second folder, one she had built herself. Inside were records Samuel did not know existed. Printed bank notifications, screenshots of declined transactions, voicemail transcripts, and her notebook. Zoey opened to the most recent entries. March 21st, removal from residence. March 21st, financial access revoked. She added a new line. March 22nd, identity verified. Independent financial capacity established. She paused, then legal position updated. Zoey closed the notebook. Her phone vibrated. An email. From Samuel. Subject line. We need to talk. Zoey opened it. The message was brief. Zoey, I think we need to have a conversation about what happened. This got out of hand. Call me. Samuel. Zoey read it once, then again. Not for emotion, for language. We need to talk. Not I was wrong. Not are you safe. Just repositioning. She did not respond. Instead, she forwarded the email to Rebecca, then added a note, document for record. No reply issued. Minutes later, Rebecca responded. Received. Will include it. Zoey set the phone down. Across the room, Lily shifted in her sleep. Zoey stood immediately. Checked breathing, adjusted position, stable, always back to what mattered. The next morning, Samuel called. Zoey let it go to voicemail. His voice came through seconds later. Zoey, this is ridiculous, he said. You can't just disappear like this. Lily needs stability. We need to figure something out. Zoey listened without expression. Then saved the file, labeled it, dated it, stored it. No response. Later that day, another message, this time sharper. You're overreacting. I didn't mean it like that. Call me. Zoey noted the shift, from control to dismissal. Soon it would become something else. It always did. Across town, Samuel paced his living room. Something had changed. He couldn't define it, but he could feel it. Zoey's silence wasn't passive. It wasn't avoidance. It was structured. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Because anger he could manage. Silence. Not like this. He checked his phone again. No response. He opened his email. Nothing new. He told himself it didn't matter, that she would call eventually, that she had to, because she had no resources, no support, no leverage. That was the assumption he held on to, because without it, the situation became something he could not predict. Back in the motel room, Zoey reviewed a new set of documents sent by Rebecca. Draft filings, preliminary legal positions, custody considerations, each one aligned with the same principle: evidence over narrative. Zoey read every line, not once, twice, making notes, adjustments, clarifications. She was not reacting to Samuel anymore. She was preparing to meet him in a system he did not control. And in that system, words were not enough. Only proof, only record, only truth. Zoey closed the file. Her gaze moved briefly to the window, not to look out. but to measure time. Everything was in motion now, quietly, precisely, irreversibly. And Samuel Carter, still waiting for a phone call, had no understanding that the conversation he was asking for would not happen on his terms or in his voice, but in a place where every word he had spoken, every decision he had made, and every line Zoey had written would be laid out exactly as it happened. Nothing added, nothing removed, nothing forgotten. Samuel Carter did not consider himself a reckless man. In his own understanding, every decision he made followed a logic that favored efficiency control and long-term advantage. What unsettled him now was not what had happened, but what had not. Zoey had not called. She had not texted, argued, pleaded, or even acknowledged his attempts to reach her. The absence of reaction stretched beyond irritation and into something more difficult to categorize. It introduced uncertainty into a structure Samuel had always believed he could manage. By the third day, that uncertainty began to reorganize itself into action. If Zoey would not respond, then he would define the next move. Samuel sat at his kitchen table, the same one where he had laid out the bank documents as a statement of finality, and opened his laptop. He did not hesitate as he searched for a family law attorney. This was not an emotional decision. It was strategic. If Zoey chose silence, then he would establish a legal narrative that positioned him as the responsible party. Within hours, he had scheduled a consultation with attorney Daniel Price, a lawyer known less for compassion and more for efficiency in custody disputes. The meeting took place the following afternoon. Daniel Price's office reflected the kind of order Samuel respected: clean lines, minimal decoration, and a tone that suggested outcomes were achieved through precision rather than persuasion. Samuel explained the situation in controlled language. "My wife left with our daughter," he said. "No clear plan, no stable income. I'm concerned about the child's well-being." Daniel listened without interruption, his expression neutral. "And prior to her leaving?" Daniel asked. Samuel leaned back slightly. There were ongoing disagreements about finances, medical expenses mostly. It became unsustainable. Daniel nodded slowly. "And your daughter's condition," chronic Samuel said, "requires consistent care." Daniel folded his hands. "Then the court will prioritize stability," he said. "Housing, financial support, access to health care. If your wife cannot demonstrate those, your position strengthens." Samuel felt a subtle shift of confidence return. "That's what I thought." Daniel's tone remained measured. "We'll need documentation, income records, proof of residence, any communication that suggests instability on her part." Samuel nodded. "I can provide that." What he did not say, and what Daniel did not yet know, was that Samuel had carefully removed Zoey's access to shared financial resources before she left. In his mind, that detail was not manipulation. It was preparation. "Then we proceed," Daniel said. "We file for temporary custody and establish a narrative early." Samuel agreed. The process began that day. Across the city, Zoey Bennett, now legally verified as Zoey Whitmore, received the notification within hours. Rebecca Lawson's email was concise. Petition filed by Samuel Carter. Temporary custody requested. Allegations include financial instability and lack of permanent residence. Zoey read the message once, then opened the attached document. The language was formal, but the structure was familiar. Samuel's argument rested on 3 points: housing instability, limited income, medical risk to the child. Zoey did not react emotionally. She analyzed. Each claim corresponded directly to actions Samuel himself had initiated: revoking financial access, forcing relocation, interrupting established medical routines. It was not unexpected. It was, in fact, consistent. Zoey forwarded the document to Rebecca with a single line: "Proceed with response preparation." Rebecca replied within minutes: "Already underway. We'll counter with full documentation. Do you want to include financial records and communication logs?" Zoey considered the question briefly. "Yes," she wrote. "Include everything." There was no hesitation, because omission created gaps, and gaps could be used. That afternoon, Zoey met with a second attorney recommended by Laura Bennett, a family law specialist with a reputation for methodical case construction. Laura did not waste time with introductions. "I've reviewed the initial filing," she said, placing a printed copy on the table between them. "His argument is predictable. It relies on presenting you as unstable." Zoey nodded. "He removed financial access the same day," Zoey said, "and forced relocation." Laura's expression sharpened slightly. "Do you have proof?" Zoey opened her folder. Inside were the records she had been building. Dates, screenshots, transaction logs, voicemail transcripts. She placed them on the table. "Everything is documented," she said. Laura reviewed the materials in silence for several minutes. When she looked up, her tone had changed. "This is not a defense," she said. "This is a reconstruction." Zoey met her gaze. "Yes." Laura leaned back slightly. "Then we don't just respond," she said. "We reframe the case entirely." Zoey did not ask what that meant. She already understood. The next several days unfolded with a precision Samuel could not see. Rebecca handled the financial disclosures. Michael Grant coordinated asset verification. Laura Bennett constructed the legal response. Each element moved independently but with alignment. Bank records were traced. Account changes were time-stamped. Medical records confirmed continuity of care despite disruption. Voicemail recordings were transcribed. Email communication was archived. Nothing was interpreted. Everything was presented. Zoey remained at the center of the process, but she did not dominate it. She reviewed, corrected, and approved. Her role was not to speak louder than Samuel, but to ensure that every claim could be answered with evidence. Meanwhile, Samuel grew increasingly certain of his position. The filing had been submitted. The process had begun. From his perspective, Zoey's continued silence reinforced his argument. She had no response, no resources, no plan. He told himself this repeatedly, because repetition made it easier to believe. What he did not account for was the difference between silence and preparation. On the fourth day, Samuel received a notice. Zoey's legal response had been filed. He opened it immediately. At first glance, it appeared standard, structured, formal. Then he began to read, line by line, claim by claim. Each of his assertions was addressed, not with denial, with documentation. Financial access revoked by Samuel Carter on March 21st. Bank records attached. Housing displacement initiated by Samuel Carter. Witness statement included. Medical care maintained by Zoey Bennett despite financial restriction. Hospital records verified. Samuel felt something shift. Not panic, not yet, but recognition. This was not the response he expected. This was not defensive. It was precise. And it was built in a way that left little room for reinterpretation. He reached the final section. Supplemental documentation. Voicemail transcripts, email records, dates, times, exact wording. Samuel closed the file slowly. For the first time, the situation no longer felt controlled, because control required predictability, and Zoey was no longer predictable. Across the city, Zoey sat beside Lily as she completed a simple drawing on a sheet of paper. The scene was quiet, ordinary. Lily looked up. "Are we going back home?" she asked. Zoey considered the question carefully. "No," she said. Lily nodded. "Okay." She returned to her drawing. Zoey watched her for a moment, then shifted her attention back to the documents in front of her. The process was not finished, not even close. But the direction was clear. Samuel had chosen to move first. And in doing so, he had revealed the structure of his strategy. Zoey had not opposed it. She had documented it. And now, she was answering it, not with argument, but with alignment. Each piece in place, each record accounted for, each statement anchored in fact. Because in the system they had both entered, the outcome would not depend on who spoke louder or who acted first. It would depend on who could prove exactly what had happened. And Zoey had already begun. The first visible crack in Samuel Carter's narrative did not come from confrontation. It came from contradiction. In legal proceedings, contradiction carried more weight than denial because it did not require interpretation. It required comparison. And comparison, when supported by records, did not rely on emotion to be understood. Samuel received the discovery request 3 days after Zoey's response was filed. At first glance, it appeared procedural requests for documentation, financial disclosures, communication logs, the kind of paperwork his attorney, Daniel Price, had already prepared him to expect. Standard Daniel had said, "We provide what's necessary, nothing more." Samuel had agreed. Control in his understanding came from limiting exposure. But as he read through Zoey's discovery submission, he realized something was different. This was not a request built on assumption. It was structured around knowledge. Specific dates were referenced, specific transactions identified, specific communications cited. Each request corresponded to something that had already happened, and more importantly, something that had already been recorded. Samuel frowned as he read. "They're asking for the March 21st account modifications," he said during a call with Daniel. Daniel didn't sound concerned. "Then we provide them." "They already have timestamps," Samuel added. "Down to the minute?" There was a brief pause. "That's unusual," Daniel admitted, "but not necessarily a problem." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his confidence still intact, but beginning to narrow. "They're also asking for all communications within 72 hours of the account changes," he said. "Emails, texts, voicemail." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Did you communicate with her during that period?" Samuel hesitated. "Not directly." "Then there's nothing to worry about," Daniel said. Samuel nodded. But something about the phrasing unsettled him. Not directly, because communication did not always require response. And Samuel had spoken. More than once. He just hadn't expected anyone to be listening in a way that mattered. Across the city, Zoey sat at a long table in Rebecca Lawson's temporary Chicago office, reviewing the compiled discovery package. The documents were arranged in layers. Primary evidence, supporting records, chronological alignment. Nothing existed in isolation. Each piece reinforced another. Michael Grant had reconstructed Samuel's financial activity with forensic precision. Patterns emerged not through accusation, but through sequence. Spending on non-essential items. Delayed or refused payments for Lily's treatment. Account restructuring timed precisely before Zoey's removal from the home. Zoey reviewed each section carefully, not looking for confirmation, looking for gaps. "Everything aligns," Rebecca said, standing beside her. "There's no inconsistency between the financial records and the communication logs." Zoey nodded. "Then we proceed." Rebecca studied her for a moment. "You're not surprised," she said. Zoey closed the file. "No, because none of this felt sudden. It felt revealed." That afternoon, the first formal contradiction appeared. It came in the form of Samuel's initial sworn statement. In it, he described himself as the sole financial provider, maintaining stability for the household, while Zoey failed to contribute meaningfully. He stated that his actions were driven by necessity, that the household had become unsustainable due to mounting medical expenses and lack of support. On its own, the statement was coherent, even persuasive, until it was placed beside the records. The bank statements told a different story. They showed discretionary spending restaurants, electronic subscription services. Continuing during the same period, Samuel claimed financial strain. More significantly, they showed delayed payments for Lily's prescriptions. Zoey did not comment on this. She did not need to. The records spoke. The second contradiction followed quickly. Samuel had stated that Zoey's departure was voluntary, that she had chosen to leave with Lily, that he had not forced the situation. But the timeline did not support that. The account closures occurred hours before the removal. The witness statement from Mrs. Harper confirmed the late-night departure. The voicemail, timestamped and transcribed, captured Samuel's voice clearly. "You take her and figure something out. I'm done." Zoey listened to the recording once. Only once. Then she archived it. Emotion did not improve accuracy. By the end of the week, Daniel Price requested a meeting with Samuel. "This is more complicated than I initially assessed." Daniel said, his tone controlled but firmer than before. Samuel frowned. How Daniel slid a printed document across the desk. "These are their financial exhibits," he said. "They've mapped your spending against your claims." Samuel glanced at the page. "I told you I was under pressure," he said. Daniel nodded. "I understand that," he replied. "But pressure doesn't explain why discretionary spending remained consistent while essential medical payments were delayed." Samuel leaned back, irritation rising. "So what I needed to maintain my work image. That's part of my job." Daniel held his gaze. "That may be true," he said, "but the court will not interpret it that way." Samuel's jaw tightened. "And the removal from the home," Daniel continued. "They have a witness and a recording." Samuel didn't respond immediately. He hadn't expected that. "She recorded me?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer the question directly. "It was documented," he said. Samuel exhaled sharply. "This is being twisted." Daniel remained calm. "No," he said. "It's being presented." The distinction mattered. Samuel felt it. For the first time, the structure of the case no longer felt like something he could shape. It felt like something he had already completed without realizing it. That night, Samuel sat alone in his living room, the same room that had once held the routine of 3 people. The silence felt different now. Not empty, exposed. He opened his email again, Zoey's response. The documents, the timelines, everything aligned too cleanly, too completely. He searched for something, anything that suggested exaggeration. He found none, because Zoey had not exaggerated. She had recorded. Across the city, Zoey sat beside Lily in a quiet waiting room at a pediatric clinic. Lily was coloring again, her breathing stable, under improved care. Zoey's phone rested on her lap screen, dark. There were no new messages from Samuel, no new attempts. The silence had shifted. It was no longer his choice. Zoey looked at Lily. "Are you tired?" she asked. "A little," Lily said. "We'll be done soon," Lily nodded. Zoey's attention returned briefly to the documents she had reviewed that morning. Not to reconsider them, but to confirm their placement. Everything was where it needed to be. Nothing rushed, nothing missing. The process was unfolding exactly as it should, because Zoey had never intended to confront Samuel directly. She had intended, from the moment she began writing things down, to let the structure speak. And now, for the first time, it was. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that could not be ignored. Samuel Carter had built his position on narrative, on how things sounded, on how they appeared. Zoey Bennett, Zoey Whitmore had built hers on record, on how things happened, on what could be proven. And as those 2 approaches met, only one of them could hold. The name Whitmore did not enter Samuel Carter's world as a revelation. It arrived as a discrepancy. He first noticed it buried in a supplemental filing, one of the many documents his attorney forwarded with a brief note review carefully before next hearing. Samuel hadn't intended to read it in detail. By that point, the volume of material had become overwhelming, and his strategy had shifted toward relying on Daniel Price to filter what mattered. But something about the structure of the document held his attention. It was precise, too precise. Each section labeled, each exhibit cross-referenced, each claim anchored not just in evidence, but in verified authority. Samuel's eyes moved across the page until they stopped. Zoey Whitmore, legally verified identity Zoey Bennett. He read the line again, then again, Whitmore. The name felt familiar, but not in a personal way. It existed somewhere else. In headlines and financial reports he had skimmed, in conversations he had half listened to when colleagues discussed large-scale corporate movements. Whitmore Holdings. He had heard it before. Not clearly, but enough. Samuel leaned forward, his focus narrowing. He opened a new tab and typed the name. The search results appeared immediately. Corporate profiles, market analyses, articles discussing infrastructure acquisitions, healthcare expansions, international investments. Numbers followed the name, large ones, not abstract figures, but valuations that carried weight. Samuel clicked on one article. The summary was direct. Whitmore Holdings' estimated valuation exceeding $25 billion with diversified assets across multiple sectors. Samuel sat back slowly. The connection did not form all at once. It assembled itself, piece by piece. Zoey, Whitmore, inheritance, legal verification. The filings he had dismissed as overly detailed. They were not excessive. They were structured around something he had not yet understood. Samuel returned to the document. This time, he read more carefully. Sections he had skimmed before now carried different meaning. Financial independence established. Asset verification confirmed. Support capacity documented beyond dispute. Samuel felt the first clear shift in his thinking. This was no longer a case about instability. It was a case about disparity, and not in his favor. He reached for his phone and called Daniel immediately. "We need to talk," he said as soon as the line connected. There was no attempt to manage tone, no effort to appear composed. Daniel noticed. "What happened?" he asked. Samuel did not answer directly. "Who is Zoey Whitmore?" he said. There was a pause. Then, "You're just seeing that now." Samuel's grip on the phone tightened. "You knew I knew the name appeared in the filings," Daniel replied. "I didn't have confirmation of its significance at the time." Samuel exhaled sharply. "It's not just a name," he said. "It's Whitmore Holdings." Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you certain?" Daniel asked. "Yes." Samuel stood pacing now. "She's tied to it. It's in the documents. Verified identity. Asset control. This isn't what we thought it was." Daniel's voice shifted, becoming more deliberate. "Then we need to reassess immediately." Samuel stopped pacing. "What does that mean?" "It means the financial argument is no longer viable," Daniel said. "If she has independent access to that level of capital, the court will consider her more than capable of providing stability." Samuel felt something tighten in his chest. "And custody," Daniel did not soften the answer. "It weakens your position." Samuel ran a hand through his hair. "This doesn't make sense," he said. She never said anything." Daniel's response was quiet. She didn't have to. The line went silent for a moment. Samuel spoke again, more slowly now. "What do we do?" Daniel considered. "We adjust strategy," he said. "Focus on relationship, not finances. Demonstrate involvement, consistency. Shift away from the narrative of instability." Samuel almost laughed. "After everything that's already been filed, it's not ideal," Daniel admitted. "But it's necessary." Samuel ended the call. He stood in the center of his living room, the same space that had once felt controlled, predictable. Now it felt different. Not because anything had physically changed, but because the structure he believed he understood had shifted beneath him. Zoey hadn't been what he assumed. Not financially, not strategically, not at all. Across the city, Zoey sat in Rebecca Lawson's office, reviewing a different set of documents. Board summaries, asset allocations, strategic overviews. The scale of Whitmore Holdings was not something that could be understood in a single reading. It required context history and careful attention to structure. Zoey did not rush. She asked questions. "How much operational involvement is expected in the first 6 months?" she asked. Michael Grant answered. "Minimal, if you choose," he said. "The current board is stable. Your role would be oversight and approval." Zoey nodded. "And long-term full authority," Rebecca said, "if you choose to exercise it." Zoey leaned back slightly. Choice. That was the key distinction. Nothing here required immediate action. Everything here required understanding. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Samuel. Zoey did not open it immediately. She finished reading the paragraph in front of her first. Only then did she look. "We need to talk. I didn't know about any of this." Zoey read the message once, then set the phone down. Rebecca observed her. "He knows," she said. Zoey nodded. "Yes." Rebecca waited. "Do you want to respond?" Zoey's answer came without hesitation. "No." Because explanation was not part of the process, not anymore. Samuel's understanding did not change what had already happened. It did not alter the records. It did not rewrite the timeline. It simply placed him in a position he had not anticipated. Zoey returned to the documents. "Continue," she said. Michael resumed his explanation. The meeting continued without interruption, because for Zoey, the emergence of Samuel's awareness did not mark a turning point. It marked a confirmation. The system was working, information was aligning, outcomes were moving forward. Samuel, meanwhile, sent another message, longer this time, more careful. "Zoey, I think we both made mistakes. I didn't realize what you were dealing with. We should sit down and figure this out for Lily." Zoey did not read it immediately. When she did not respond. Not because she refused to engage, but because engagement in the form Samuel was offering no longer served a purpose. The conversation he wanted was no longer where the outcome would be decided. And somewhere between a courtroom, a set of financial records, and a name he had finally begun to understand. Samuel Carter realized something he had not considered before. He had not just misjudged Zoey. He had misunderstood the entire structure of the situation. And in doing so, he had made decisions that could not be undone. By apology, by explanation, or by timing. Because the moment he chose to act, he had already committed himself to the consequences of not knowing who she really was. Samuel Carter did not sleep well that night. It was not because of guilt, at least not in the way it might be described by others. What unsettled him was the collapse of certainty. For weeks longer, if he were honest, he had been operating within a structure that made sense to him. Every action, every decision, every justification had followed a logic that reinforced his position. Now that structure no longer held. Zoey's silence, which he had once interpreted as weakness, had revealed itself as something else entirely intentional, controlled and aligned with a system he had not anticipated. And now with the name Whitmore no longer abstract but verified, Samuel found himself attempting to recalculate his place within a situation that had already moved beyond him. By morning he had decided on a different approach, not confrontation, not control, correction. He composed the message, carefully reading it twice before sending. "Zoey, I've had time to think about everything. I know I handled things badly. I was under pressure and I didn't consider how it affected you or Lily. That's on me. I want to make this right. Not just for us, but for her. We need to find a better way forward. Samuel." He stared at the screen for a moment after sending it. The tone was measured, accountable without being fully exposed. It was in his mind the appropriate adjustment. Across the city, Zoey received the message while seated in a quiet conference room reviewing preliminary filings for the upcoming hearing. She read it once. Then again, not for emotion, for language. "I know I handled things badly. I was under pressure. We need to find a better way forward." Each sentence acknowledged error without defining it. Each phrase shifted responsibility into shared space. Zoey set the phone down. Rebecca Lawson looked up from her own documents. "From him?" she asked. "Yes." Rebecca did not ask to read it. "What's your response?" she said. Zoey closed the file in front of her before answering. No response. Rebecca nodded, because she understood. Acknowledgement, when it arrived after consequence, did not alter the sequence of events. It simply repositioned the person who had made them. Samuel sent a second message later that afternoon. This one more direct. "I'd like to see Lily. She's my daughter. We shouldn't be doing this through lawyers." Zoey read it while sitting beside Lily in a pediatric recovery room. The girl was resting after a routine but necessary procedure. Her breathing supported her condition stable, under better care than she had received in weeks. Zoey watched her for a moment before returning her attention to the phone. "She's my daughter." The statement was true and incomplete. Zoey did not respond. Instead, she forwarded the message to Laura Bennett. Document. No reply. Laura responded shortly after. Will address visitation through court channels. Do not engage directly. Zoey placed the phone face down. The room remained quiet, controlled, different from the environment Lily had been in before. Not because of wealth, but because of access. Samuel called that evening. Zoey let it go to voicemail again. This time, his tone had changed, not aggressive, not dismissive, but strained. Zoey, I know you're getting my messages, he said. I'm trying to fix this. You can't just shut me out. That's not fair to me or to Lily. Zoey listened to the recording once, then archived it. Fairness was not the standard being applied. Sequence was, and the sequence had already been established. The following day, Samuel took a different step. He requested an emergency meeting with his attorney. Daniel Price did not delay. When Samuel entered the office, the atmosphere felt different than it had before, less controlled, more cautious. I've reviewed the latest filings, Daniel said without preamble. And your messages. Samuel frowned. My messages. They were included in a supplemental submission, Daniel said. Everything you've sent has been documented. Samuel exhaled sharply. Of course it has. Daniel studied him. You need to understand something, he said. The timing of your communication matters. Samuel leaned forward. What does that mean? It means your acknowledgement now. Daniel said comes after your actions have already been recorded, filed, and structured within a legal framework. Samuel's jaw tightened. So what, I'm trying to correct it? Daniel nodded. I understand that, he said. But the court will evaluate consistency, not intent. Your earlier statements, your financial decisions, your actions, they establish a pattern. Samuel sat back, frustration rising beneath the surface. So I'm just supposed to do nothing? Daniel paused. No, he said. You proceed carefully. You avoid further unstructured communication. And you prepare for the hearing. Samuel looked away. The room felt smaller than it had before, because control once assumed had now become conditional. Across the city, Zoey continued her preparation. Not visibly, not dramatically, but completely. The legal response had already been filed. The financial verification had been completed. Now the focus shifted to presentation. Laura Bennett walked her through the structure of the upcoming hearing. They will likely attempt to reposition the argument, Laura said. Shift from financial instability to parental involvement. Zoey nodded. That's consistent, she said. Laura continued. They may request visitation supervised or otherwise. The court will consider it. Zoey's expression did not change. What is our position? She asked. Laura met her gaze. That any access must be structured, documented, and in the best interest of the child, she said. Not based on his request, but on his record. Zoey nodded. Because again, record. Not claim, not apology. Record. That evening, Zoey sat beside Lily as she worked on a small puzzle at the table. Mom, Lily said softly, Yes. Is Dad coming back? Zoey did not answer immediately. Not because she didn't know, but because the answer required precision. No, she said. Lily looked down at the puzzle. Okay, there was no visible sadness, only adjustment. Zoey watched her for a moment, then reached out and helped to place a piece correctly. The image began to form, slowly, piece by piece. Across town, Samuel sat alone again. His phone remained silent, not because he had nothing more to say, but because for the first time, he understood that what he said no longer held the weight it once did. The system had shifted, the conversation had moved, and the outcome would not be decided by his explanation, his intention, or his regret, but by everything that had already been said, done, and recorded before he ever thought to change his tone. The courtroom did not feel dramatic. There were no raised voices, no visible tension that could be easily identified as conflict. Instead, the atmosphere was controlled, procedural, and defined by structure. Every movement followed an order. Every statement had a place. Zoey sat beside Laura Bennett at the petitioner's table, her posture steady, her expression unchanged. She had chosen a simple, dark outfit. Nothing that drew attention, nothing that suggested performance. The focus was not on her appearance, and she made no effort to shift it there. Across the room, Samuel Carter sat with Daniel Price. He looked composed, at least at first glance. But the composure was different from before. It was no longer rooted in certainty. It was maintained through effort. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The proceedings began. Laura leaned slightly toward Zoey. "We move step by step," she said quietly. "No deviation." Zoey nodded, because deviation was unnecessary. Everything that needed to be said had already been prepared. Daniel Price spoke first, presenting Samuel's position with controlled clarity. He did not raise his voice. He did not exaggerate. Instead, he reframed. "Your Honor," he began, "my client acknowledges that recent events have been difficult. However, his primary concern remains the well-being of his daughter. He has maintained stable employment, consistent residence, and a desire to remain actively involved in her life." Zoey listened. Not to the tone, to the structure. Daniel was no longer arguing that Zoey was unstable. He was repositioning Samuel as involved. It was expected. He recognizes that mistakes were made. Daniel continued, but he is committed to correcting them and ensuring that his daughter has access to both parents. Acknowledgement, without detail. Consistent with the messages Samuel had sent. Laura waited until Daniel finished. Then she stood. "Your Honor," she said, "the respondent's position is not based on interpretation, but on documented sequence." She did not rush. She did not pause for effect. She simply proceeded. "We will present evidence that establishes 3 key points. First, that financial access was revoked by the petitioner prior to the respondent's relocation. Second, that the respondent and the minor child were removed from their residence under conditions not initiated by the respondent. And third, that medical care for the child was maintained by the respondent despite those conditions." Laura placed the first set of documents before the court. "Exhibit A," she said. Bank records indicating account modifications executed on March 21st, time-stamped and verified. The documents were passed forward. The judge reviewed them. Samuel's expression remained still. But his attention sharpened. Exhibit B. Laura continued. Communication logs including voicemail recordings from the same date. She did not play the recording immediately. She allowed the transcript to be read first. The words were familiar. Samuel recognized them instantly. "You take her and figure something out. I'm done." There was no interpretation attached, no commentary, just the statement. The judge looked up briefly, not at Zoey, at Samuel, then back to the document. Laura continued. "Exhibit C," she said. "Witness statement from Mrs. Eleanor Harper, confirming the respondent's departure from the residence under the conditions described." Again, no embellishment, no emphasis, only alignment, each piece connected to the next. Samuel shifted slightly in his seat, not visibly enough to draw attention, but enough to register. Daniel leaned toward him, speaking quietly. "Stay composed," he said. Samuel nodded. But the structure he had relied on was no longer intact. Because the case was no longer about what he intended. It was about what had been done. Laura moved to the next section. "Exhibit D," she said. "Medical records for the minor child demonstrating continuity of care following relocation, including updated treatment plans and verified appointments." The documents were passed forward. The judge reviewed them carefully. "What is the current status of the child's condition?" the judge asked. Laura responded. "Stable, Your Honor. Improved under consistent treatment." The judge nodded. And prior to relocation, Laura did not answer immediately. She turned slightly, referencing the document. "Treatment continuity was inconsistent due to financial constraints imposed by the petitioner's control of shared accounts," she said. Samuel's head lifted slightly. "That's not," he began. Daniel placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Wait," he said under his breath. Laura did not react to the interruption. She continued. Supporting documentation included in Exhibit A. The judge made a note. Samuel leaned back again, his expression tightening. The pattern was becoming clear, not because of what Zoey was saying, but because of what she wasn't. She was not speaking. She was not defending herself. She was not addressing Samuel directly. Everything was being presented through structure, through record, through alignment. Daniel stood again. Your Honor, he said my client does not dispute that the events occurred. However the context, the judge raised a hand slightly. Counsel, the judge said context is relevant when it alters the sequence. At this stage, the sequence appears consistent. Daniel paused, then nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He adjusted his approach. My client's position is that despite these events, he remains a capable and willing parent, and that continued involvement in the child's life is in her best interest. The argument had shifted fully now, from defense to access. Laura did not object, because this was expected. She turned to Zoey briefly. We address this now, she said quietly. Zoey nodded. Laura stood once more. Your Honor, she said the respondent does not oppose structured involvement, provided it is aligned with the child's medical and emotional needs, and based on documented behavior rather than stated intention. The wording was precise. Not refusal, not acceptance, condition. The judge looked between both parties. Given the documentation presented, the judge said the court will proceed with temporary determinations. The room remained still. No one spoke. Primary custody is granted to the respondent, the judge continued. Visitation for the petitioner will be considered under supervised conditions pending further review. Samuel's hand tightened against the edge of the table. He did not speak, because there was nothing to interrupt. The decision was not emotional. It was procedural. Further hearings will address long-term arrangements, the judge added. All parties are expected to comply with documentation requirements moving forward. The gavel did not strike loudly. It did not need to. The outcome had already been established. The sound was simply confirmation. Zoey remained seated for a moment after the proceedings ended, not because she needed time, but because she did not move unnecessarily. Laura gathered the documents. That was clean, she said. Zoey nodded. Yes, there was no satisfaction in her expression. No relief. Only acknowledgement. Because this was not the end. It was a step. Across the room, Samuel stood slowly. He looked toward Zoey. For a moment it seemed as though he might approach. He did not, because the space between them was no longer defined by distance. It was defined by structure. And that structure had already placed them on different sides. Zoey stood. She did not look back, because there was nothing behind her that required attention. Everything that mattered was already moving forward. Consequences did not arrive all at once. They unfolded gradually in layers, each one revealing itself through systems Samuel Carter had once believed he understood. The first shift came quietly. 3 days after the hearing, Samuel received an email from his company's regional director requesting a meeting. The subject line was neutral, but the timing was not. Internal reviews rarely occurred without reason, and they almost never coincided with legal disputes that had begun to circulate beyond private channels. Samuel read the message twice before responding. Available tomorrow at 10. The meeting took place in a conference room that felt smaller than he remembered. Not physically, but perceptually. The same walls, the same table, the same glass panel overlooking a corridor bus, but the familiarity no longer provided comfort. His regional director, Mark Ellison, sat across from him with a folder that remained closed for most of the conversation. We've received some information, Mark said, his tone controlled, that may affect your role here. Samuel kept his posture steady. What kind of information? Mark chose his words carefully. Legal filings, he said. They've been shared more broadly than expected. Samuel felt the implication immediately. This is a personal matter, he said. It has nothing to do with my performance. Mark nodded slightly. I understand your position, he said. But when documentation includes financial behavior and decision-making patterns, it raises questions about judgment. Samuel leaned forward. My work has been consistent, he said. My numbers are solid. That's true, Mark replied. But this isn't just about numbers. He finally opened the folder. Inside were printed excerpts. Not everything, just enough. Bank activity summaries, redacted transcripts, timeline references. Samuel recognized them instantly. They're presenting this out of context, he said. Mark did not argue. Context will be evaluated, he said. But for now, we're placing you under review. The words were not aggressive. They did not need to be. Review meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant exposure. And exposure, once initiated, rarely reversed itself without consequence. Samuel nodded slowly. Understood. The meeting ended without resolution, because resolution required time. And time in this case worked differently than Samuel expected. Outside the office, conversations shifted. Not openly, not directly, but noticeably. Colleagues who had once engaged casually now limited interaction. Conversations ended more quickly. Invitations did not extend as far. It was not rejection. It was recalibration. People adjusted to new information in ways that preserved their own positions. Samuel recognized the pattern. He had done the same thing himself in other situations with other people. Now, he was the subject. Across the city, Zoey did not track any of this. Not because she was unaware, but because it did not alter her focus. She sat beside Lily in a quiet outpatient facility, reviewing the next phase of her treatment plan with a specialist who spoke in measured, precise terms. The current response is positive, the doctor said. We'll continue monitoring, but the adjustment in care has made a significant difference. Zoey listened carefully. What variables remain, she asked. The doctor nodded, appreciating the question. Consistency, he said. Access to medication, controlled environment, reduced stress. Zoey noted each point, not mentally, on paper, because memory alone was not sufficient. Lily sat quietly, her attention moving between the conversation and a small object in her hands. She did not fully understand the medical language, but she understood tone. And the tone was different, less urgent, more stable. That was enough. Zoey closed her notebook. Proceed as outlined, she said. There was no hesitation, because the decision had already been evaluated. Everything aligned. Back in his apartment, Samuel sat at the same table again. The space had not changed, but its function had. It was no longer a place of control. It was a place of reflection. He opened his laptop not to review documents, but to search. Whitmore Holdings. This time, he read more carefully. Detailed reports, board compositions, strategic investments. He moved past the summaries into the structure. Ownership percentages, control mechanisms, decision authority. Each layer revealed something he had not understood before. Zoey had not just gained access to wealth. She had gained position, influence, infrastructure. Samuel leaned back slowly. The realization did not arrive with shock. It settled. Heavy, measured, irreversible. He thought about the night he had asked her to leave. The clarity of it, the certainty, the belief that he was simplifying his life, reducing complexity. Now, he saw it differently. Not as simplification, as miscalculation. Not because of the money, but because of what he had assumed about her. Her silence, her restraint, her lack of response. He had interpreted those as absence, of strength, of capability, of leverage. He had been wrong, and the consequences of that error were not emotional. They were structural. They existed in documents, in decisions, in outcomes already moving forward. Samuel's phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. We need to prepare for the next hearing. There are additional filings. Samuel stared at the screen for a moment, then responded. I'll be there. Across the city, Zoey sat in a quiet office reviewing a different set of documents. Not legal, corporate, board recommendations, preliminary briefings. She did not rush through them. She read each section with the same attention she had applied to everything else. Because scale did not change process, only scope. Rebecca Lawson sat across from her. You don't have to engage with this immediately, she said. The structure will hold. Zoey nodded. "I understand," she said. But she continued reading, because understanding required engagement, not avoidance. "Your position allows you to redefine several areas of the organization," Rebecca added, "if you choose to." Zoey looked up briefly. "Not yet," she said. Rebecca did not question the decision, because restraint in this context was not hesitation. It was control. Zoey returned to the document. Her phone remained on the table beside her. Silent. No messages, no calls, because everything that needed to be said was already in motion. Samuel Carter sitting alone with the realization of what he had done. And Zoe Whitmore moving forward within a structure she had not sought, but now fully understood. Occupied the same timeline, but not the same position. One was reacting. The other had already moved beyond reaction. And as the consequences continued to unfold, quietly, systematically, without spectacle, the difference between them became impossible to ignore, not because it was announced, but because it was evident. In every document, in every decision, in every outcome that followed. The ruling did not arrive as a surprise. Not to Zoe, not to her legal team. Even Samuel, in a way he would not have admitted aloud, had begun to anticipate the direction of it. By the time the second hearing was scheduled, the structure of the case had already been established through documentation alignment and the quiet accumulation of facts that no longer required interpretation. The courtroom felt the same as before. Controlled, ordered, predictable. Zoe sat in the same position beside Laura Bennett, her posture unchanged, her attention steady. She had not altered her approach, not in appearance, not in behavior. The process did not require adjustment. Across from her, Samuel Carter appeared more contained than he had been during the previous hearing. Not because he had regained confidence, but because he had learned at least partially that reaction no longer served him. Daniel Price organized his documents carefully, his movements slower, more deliberate. Strategy had shifted. There would be no attempt to challenge Zoe's position directly. Instead, the focus remained on mitigation. When the judge entered the room, settled into silence. Proceedings began without delay. Daniel spoke first. "Your Honor," he said, "the petitioner acknowledges the court's prior determinations and is prepared to comply with all conditions set forth. At this stage, we request consideration for expanded visitation with the long-term goal of maintaining a meaningful parental relationship." There was no attempt to revisit earlier claims, no effort to dispute evidence already established. It was a controlled repositioning. Samuel remained silent beside him. Laura waited until Daniel finished before standing. "Your Honor," she said, "the respondent's position remains consistent. We do not oppose structured visitation provided that it aligns with documented behavior and the child's medical needs. However, we request that all access remain supervised until a sustained pattern of reliability is demonstrated." Her tone was even. Not resistant, not accommodating, conditional. The judge reviewed the documents in front of him. "The court has reviewed the submitted materials," he said, "including updated medical reports, compliance records, and communication logs." He paused briefly, scanning a page. "The child's condition has shown measurable improvement under the current care structure." Zoe did not react. She had already seen the reports, already understood what they meant. "The petitioner has complied with initial requirements for supervised visitation," the judge continued. "However, the duration and consistency of that compliance remain limited." Samuel's expression remained controlled, but his focus sharpened. He understood what that meant. Not denial, delay. "The court will therefore maintain the current custody arrangement," the judge said. "Primary custody remains with the respondent. Supervised visitation will continue with periodic review based on documented compliance." The words settled into the room without resistance. Because there was nothing to resist, they were not based on argument. They were based on sequence. Samuel exhaled slowly, not visibly enough to draw attention, but enough to release tension he had been holding since the hearing began. The judge continued. "Additionally," he said, "the court has reviewed financial disclosures submitted by both parties." There was a slight shift in the room. not in volume, in focus. Based on verified documentation, the judge said the respondent demonstrates substantial independent financial capacity, ensuring long-term stability for the child's care. Samuel lowered his gaze briefly. Not in shame, but in acknowledgement. The argument he had built about instability, about financial strain, no longer existed within this structure. It had been replaced. Not challenged, replaced. There is no basis, the judge added, to reconsider custody on financial grounds. Daniel did not object. He could not, because the statement was not interpretive. It was conclusive. The judge closed the file. This matter will proceed to final review at a later date, he said. All parties are expected to maintain compliance. The session ended. No gavel struck loudly. No dramatic conclusion marked the moment, because the outcome had already been determined long before the words were spoken. Zoey remained seated for a moment after the judge exited. Not because she needed time, but because movement for her was always intentional. Laura gathered the documents. "That holds," she said quietly. "We maintain position." Zoey nodded. Yes. There was no visible relief, no satisfaction, because this was not a victory. It was confirmation. Across the room, Samuel stood slowly. For a moment he hesitated. Then, with a measured step, he walked toward Zoey. Laura noticed first. She did not intervene. Zoey turned slightly as Samuel approached. They stood facing each other. For the first time since the process began, without distance enforced by structure. Samuel spoke first. "I didn't understand," he said. The words were simple, unadorned. Zoey did not respond immediately, because understanding in this context did not change outcome. Samuel continued. "I thought I was making things manageable," he said. "I thought I was fixing a situation that was getting out of control." As Zoey listened, not to the explanation, to the pattern, it was consistent with everything that had come before. Reframing, repositioning. "I was wrong," Samuel added. This time the statement carried more weight, not because it was emotional, but because it was direct. Zoey met his gaze. "Yes," she said. There was no emphasis, no judgment, just acknowledgement. Samuel exhaled. "I want to be part of her life," he said. "I'll do what's required." Zoey considered the statement, not for sincerity, for structure. "That's already been defined," she said. Samuel nodded. "I know." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, not resolved, just present. Samuel looked at her for a moment longer, then asked quietly, "Was any of this ever going to be different?" Zoey did not answer immediately, because the question did not refer to a single moment. It referred to a sequence, and sequences were not changed by intention alone. "No," she said, not because it was impossible, but because the choices had already been made. Samuel nodded slowly. He did not argue, because there was nothing left to argue against. Zoey stepped back slightly, not as rejection, as conclusion. The conversation had reached its limit. Samuel understood. He stepped aside. Zoey turned and walked toward the exit. Her pace remained steady, unchanged, because nothing about her movement depended on what had just been said. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, simply open. Zoey paused briefly at the steps, not to reflect, but to orient. Her phone vibrated. A message from Rebecca. Board meeting scheduled, attendance optional. Zoey read it, then replied, "Not today." She put the phone away, because there were priorities that did not shift. No matter the scale, no matter the outcome. She walked down the steps, not looking back, not because there was nothing behind her, but because everything that mattered was already ahead. The transition did not happen all at once. There was no moment where Zoey Whitmore stepped into a new life and everything shifted instantly into place. Instead, it unfolded in the same way everything else had, with structure, with sequence, and with a deliberate refusal to rush what required understanding. The apartment she chose was not large, though it could have been. It was quiet, located near the medical center where Lily's treatment continued, and designed more for stability than impression. The windows faced a line of trees, rather than a skyline, and the rooms held only what was necessary. Zoey arranged it carefully. Medication cabinet secured, organized, accessible. Documents filed, labeled, stored in a way that did not rely on memory. Schedules visible, consistent, predictable. Nothing excessive, nothing performative. Because comfort for Zoey had never been defined by space. It had always been defined by control. Lily adapted quickly. Children did when the environment around them stopped shifting unpredictably. Her breathing stabilized further under consistent care. The pauses between treatments lengthened. The tension that had once lived quietly in her shoulders began to disappear in small, almost unnoticeable increments. "Can I go outside today?" Lily asked one afternoon, standing near the window. Zoey looked up from the documents she was reviewing. "Yes," she said, "for a short time." Lily nodded, already reaching for her jacket. Zoey watched her for a moment before returning to the page. The documents in front of her were not legal this time. They were operational. Whitmore Holdings, board summaries, strategic reports, investment structures. Zoey did not read them as someone discovering something new. She read them as someone reclaiming something that had always existed beyond her immediate life. Rebecca Lawson sat across from her. "You've delayed direct involvement longer than expected," she said. Zoey turned a page. "I needed to establish priority," she replied. Rebecca nodded. And now Zoey closed the file. "Now I engage," she said. Not fully, not immediately, but intentionally. Because involvement at this scale required more than authority. It required alignment. Across the city, Samuel Carter's life had not collapsed. It had narrowed. His position at work remained under review, not terminated, but no longer stable. His interactions with colleagues were limited, professional, and carefully measured. Conversations that once carried ease now carried awareness. He followed the court's conditions, supervised visits, scheduled times, documented interactions. He arrived early, left on time, spoke carefully, because everything he did now existed within a record. During one visit, Lily sat across from him in a small monitored room. She held a book in her hands. Samuel watched her. "You look better," he said. Lily nodded. "I feel better." There was no accusation in her voice, no distance, just observation. Samuel leaned forward slightly. "That's good," he said. He paused, then added, "I'm trying to do things differently." Lily looked at him. "Okay," she said. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Samuel understood the difference, because he was beginning to understand something else as well. Change, when it came after consequence, did not restore what had been lost. It only defined what came next. Back in the apartment, Zoey finalized her first directive as primary beneficiary. It was not a large decision, not compared to what she could have done, but it was precise. She authorized a restructuring within one of Whitmore Holdings' healthcare divisions, expanding access programs for long-term pediatric care. Not publicly, not announced, implemented, because impact for Zoey did not require visibility. It required accuracy. Rebecca reviewed the document. "This will shift allocation significantly," she said. Zoey nodded. "Yes." Rebecca studied her for a moment. "You're not approaching this as expansion," she said. "You're approaching it as correction." Zoey did not respond immediately, because the distinction was not one she needed to define aloud. "Yes," she said finally. "Correction. Not of the company, of access, of structure, of systems that had not been designed with consistency in mind." Later that evening, Zoey stood by the window as Lily slept. The room was quiet, not empty, not silent in the way silence had once felt, but settled. Zoey's phone rested on the table beside her. No new messages, no unresolved notifications, because everything that required action had been addressed. She did not think about Samuel, not directly, because his role in her life had already been redefined, not erased, not denied, placed. within a structure that no longer depended on his decisions. Zoey turned away from the window and moved toward the table. Her notebook lay there, the same one she had used from the beginning. She opened it. The earlier entries remained unchanged. Dates, statements, records of moments that had once defined her daily life. She turned to a new page. The pen moved steadily. Current status: stable residence established. Medical continuity secured. Legal position confirmed. She paused, then added, system functioning. Zoey closed the notebook. Not because the process was finished, but because the phase was. Across the city, Samuel sat alone once more. Not in confusion, not in denial, but in recognition. He had spent weeks trying to understand where things had gone wrong. Now he understood something simpler. Nothing had gone wrong suddenly. Everything had unfolded exactly as it had been built. Choice by choice, word by word, action by action. And Zoey had not changed the outcome. She had revealed it. Back in the apartment, Zoey turned off the light. The room settled into quiet. Lily's breathing remained steady. The structure held, and for the first time, not as survival, but as stability. Zoey did not look back, because she did not need to. She had not left anything unfinished, only moved forward with what remained true. In the end, there are no loud victories in stories like this. No moment where everything is returned corrected or undone in a single gesture. What remains instead is something quieter, more difficult to notice, unless you are willing to look closely. A sequence, a pattern, a record of choices that once made cannot be separated from their consequences. Zoey never raised her voice. She never stood in a room and demanded to be seen differently. She did not argue her worth or try to rewrite what had already been said about her. She paid attention. She documented. She moved when movement was required and stayed still when stillness carried more weight than reaction. And in doing so, she allowed something rare to happen. The truth did not need to be defended. It only needed to be shown. Samuel Carter was not destroyed. That is not how this kind of story ends. He remained where his choices had placed him within a life that continued but no longer on the terms he once assumed were fixed. What he lost was not taken from him in anger. It was left behind, because it had not been protected when it mattered. And Lily grew stronger in a space where care was no longer conditional, where stability was not negotiated, where her needs were not weighed against inconvenience. As for Zoey, she did not walk away victorious. She walked away aligned, with herself, with what she had recorded, with what she chose to build next. If you've stayed with this story until now, then you already understand something important. Strength does not always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like clarity. If this story meant something to you, you can let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you choose to stay for more stories like this, quiet, grounded, and honest, you're always welcome here.